Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. Just me in the intro today, but it will be both me and Jonas, my co-host for the season, in the interview today. So almost a little backwards on how we normally do it. Normally it's both of our co-hosts in the intro, outro, and then we do the interview solo. So this week, Jonas and I hopped on the phone with Tim Tursonoff, and we had a great discussion about multi-practice ownership. And I think Tim is just one of those guys that, you just listen to kind of all day. And that's what Jonas and I were talking about after the interview. And we just enjoyed letting him talk and share his experience. He's got a really unique group in Florida, and so it was great learning from him. I won't take too long in the intro. I'll get straight to the interview. I mentioned in the last episode, but I had a little bit of a recording issue these last two episodes, so if it cuts in and out a little bit, that's totally my fault. I do apologize about that, and I have that resolved, but hopefully that won't be happening in the future. Anyway, thanks for listening. We'll jump right to the interview. Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. I have with me here today my co-host for the season, Dr. Jonas Ashbaugh, and we have a guest today. So this is the first episode where we'll have both hosts on the line here on this podcast. So Jonas, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today?
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce Tim Tursonoff. Once again, you guys may have listened to his previous podcast about his experience in dentistry. And George and I thought it'd be a very interesting concept to talk to him about what the steps would be to go from one practice to two practice. Because I think that a lot of people have that idea in mind. And we wanted to break it down and have an educated discussion on what that takes, some of the pros behind it and some of the cons that people may not foresee.
So welcome to the show. Tim, how you doing today, Tim?
I am doing great. Thanks for asking. It's been a great day here in Jacksonville.
So Tim, for the audience who hasn't listened to your last episode with Jonas, can you tell us a little about yourself and your background?
Sure, absolutely. I am not a dentist. My wife is the dentist. I have a corporate finance and then later sales and marketing background. Prior to coming to the business of dentistry, I've been in the business of dentistry part-time since 2004 and full-time since 2006. I presently run a small DSO here in North Florida. We are about to open our 8th office, and what makes us unique is the fact that we are predominantly a fee-for-service organization, as opposed to the absolute majority of other corporate organizations and DSOs throughout the country that are either Medicaid HMO or HMO PPO or worst case or best case scenario all PPO driven. We are actually fee-for-service driven.
And so, Tim, for our audience member, what about your DSO allows you guys to do that?
It's a lot of hard work, a lot of tweaking, a lot of perfecting the processes, patient experience. Patient experience is probably the number one, number two, and number three top priority. As you can imagine, when you run primarily a fee-for-service organization, no patients come to us because they have to. They come to us because they choose to, and that makes our job obviously much more complex. That does have a direct effect on how quickly we can grow. Scalability is an issue because, in my humble opinion, the less the amount of government plans you take, HMO plans you take, the more difficult it becomes to grow and scale. So, which is we're totally fine with that. We don't have any aspirations of becoming the next Great Expressions or the next Heartland. But we do want to grow at the right pace for us, and we've been pretty successful at doing so. We've only been in the multi-ownership arena since 2011, and basically on average we've been adding 1 or 2 offices a year. Only after we've integrated them more or less successfully, we start looking at other acquisition opportunities. So again, it's definitely a lot more involved and complex to run a fee-for-service multi-office organization than it is to run a organization that is 50, 60, 70, 80% Medicaid, or even has a 35, 30 Medicaid HMO PPO mix. So But again, that is a decision that we've made, and we're completely comfortable with it. And quite frankly, at this point, that's all we know how to do.
And so, Tim,
I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead.
From my perspective, I think, we'll talk about the challenges with, multi-practice ownership. But, I think the provider is always the big challenge, and turnover at the dentist position and across the location. So how are you able to handle that, with a fee-for-service model that's more, I'd imagine turnover is more volatile in that model than it would be in a model where they're coming to you for other reasons. So how are you able to handle the dentists in your organization, and what kind of turnover have you guys had?
Well, actually, if you don't mind me doing so, I am going to correct you. It's actually less volatile in my business model than it is in the majority of other business models. The reason for that is, again, like I said before, it's highly demanding, it's highly complex. However, when it works the way it's supposed to, it's a thing of beauty. As I always tell all of my people at all levels, including doctors, we are a high performance organization. In order to be successful, everything has to be high performing. We are any of you car guys by any chance?
No, not me, Jonas.
No, no,
not really. Okay, yeah, because no. I always have these car analogies. We are like a well-tuned, very well sorted out 900 horsepower GTR. When everything works the way it's supposed to, the fuel system, the cooling, the engine, the transmission, the suspension, it moves at a very fast pace, and it's a thing of beauty. What does that do? What does that have to do with doctors? Well, as opposed to most of the big guys and medium-sized guys who have made very significant efforts in making sure that associate dentists become basically salaried employees with a small opportunity for a bonus, we actually are all about our doctors, making good money. And quite frankly, and again, this is something that all of my doctors have heard before. If you're an associate doctor that works full time with us, and you're not making $200,000 a year or more, I have a problem with that, and the organization as a whole has a problem with it. It means that something is not working right, and again, it's a very different standpoint, because I know that because I interview a lot of young doctors, and they come to me from all types of corporate organizations, and I don't know what you guys are hearing, and I'd love to get your feedback, because I'm sure you talk to a lot of young doctors, but the majority of associate doctors seem to these days make 125, 115, 135, 140, 150, 160 is a high income, and if anybody is making 170, that is really good for a young doctor. Again, my math starts at 200, so. And, finding the right doctor is never easy, but if we do find somebody, we work very, very hard to keep them happy, both financially and otherwise. And I've been blessed with a lot of long-term associate doctors. As a matter of fact, my turnover is probably one of the lowest amongst any corporate. And again, because we do try very, very hard to keep doctor satisfaction high. It is never perfect. It is never 100%. But I try to be at least in the 80s, if not the 90s, as far as that, as far as percentile is concerned. I don't hire any rookies as far as assistants and administrative personnel, because it's, in my experience, it's difficult to run a high performance organization if you have a bunch of, teenagers basically, and guys and gals in their early 20s who have very little experience, very little education. So, we may not have Taj Mahals of practices, but we do try to get doctors all the necessary technology that they need to take good care of our patients. The lab piece of our value proposition is also important. Did you and I talk about our lab at all last time, Jonas? I don't remember.
No, we didn't actually. No, we did not.
Yeah, lab piece is very, very important as well. Again, not to point fingers and not to call people out, but as you guys both know, the majority, or at least quite a few players in the marketplace these days do outsource a lot of lab work to China and other offshore type situations, and I completely understand why. Because you cannot argue with the financial aspects of that value proposition. As opposed to them, we do everything in house. I have a lab organization that employs about 10 people in it. We do the absolute majority of crown and bridge and the absolute majority of removable in house. Does that save me any money in the long run? Probably not. Especially in the crown and bridge. In the crown and bridge, I'm probably costing myself $6,000 to $8,000 a month more than I would have if I did like everyone else is doing, i.e., send it to China. On the removable side, the denture and the partial side, I think it's probably break even. But what it does accomplish, it makes it a lot easier on our doctors, and it makes it a lot easier on our patients as well, because the turnaround is quicker, the quality is more predictable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that is also a piece that seems to be one of the factors that our doctors do appreciate. Another thing is because, like I said, we believe that we are a pretty high performance organization, as opposed to the majority of my big brothers at the big corporates. We are not necessarily 85, 90, 95% young doctor driven organization. I do have some new graduates, but they are only about 35% of our doctors. The majority of our doctors would be described as mid-career, meaning they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and we have some more experienced docs that are in their 60s. Why? Again, because we try to give them a wonderful opportunity to be very, very productive, very, very successful without having to worry about the admin part of the business and about worrying about the business. So, again, what I usually pitch to those doctors is pretty simple. Dear doctor, you can come to us, and if you're very, very good, you're going to make, $350,000, $400,000, $450,000, $500,000 a year. And guess what? You don't have to worry about running the business. So, and it seems to resonate with the right kind of doctor.
And Tim,
very cool. Good.
By the way, feel free to correct me anytime. Anytime I say anything that you don't agree with. Getting back to my original point, I think my question was mainly in regards to the fact that you are fee for service, and I would have thought, from a naive perspective, not knowing your model too well, I would have thought that being a fee for service group, you are more susceptible to patient attrition due to associate turnover. So I'd like you to tell me why I'm wrong.
These are two separate points for as far as I'm concerned. Patient attrition is always an issue. Okay. And, if you looked at my initiatives for 2018, battling patient attrition is absolutely, positively one of the highest priorities. It's definitely in the top 5, if not top 3. And to furthermore, to your point, if I had a lot of associate doctor turnover, yes, that would be a huge factor. Again, I've been fortunate and blessed with significantly below market averages in terms of associate doctor turnover. Okay,
yeah, I think I see where I think we had a misunderstanding. I got you now.
Yeah. But I mean, absolutely. If I had what typically goes on at a normal DSO that runs on Medicaid HMO type of mix, and my associate doctors on average were lasting 11, 12, 14, 16 months, yes, it would be a huge issue. Absolutely.
Okay.
No doubt.
Yeah. It's hard to overcome the assumption when you think DSO, you immediately think turnover. I mean, that's just what you see around the country. But to Tim's model, I mean, and to his credit, I mean, he's able to prove that wrong with running the business the way he runs it. So
exactly. And I tell you what, one of the reasons I think, the main reason is basically let's kind of have an honest conversation as to what's causing turnover. And there are quite a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is money. I mean, I recently spoke in front of the graduating class at LECOM, that new school here in Florida, our third dental school. And we, as a part of my presentation, we did a little exercise as to how much money do you need to make as a new doctor to have a decent lifestyle. I'm not talking about a lavish lifestyle. I'm talking about a decent lifestyle. And the number that I came up with, I don't know what you guys think, but the number I came up with, you got to make at least $175,000 a year to have a decent lifestyle, to be able to afford a few small luxuries, to be able to pay your student loan debt and pay your taxes. You got to make 175. Well, guess what? The problem is that as far as I know, and please correct me, guys, because if what you guys are hearing is significantly different from what I'm hearing, I'd love to learn. I always want to learn new things. But the problem is that on average, a new doctor out of dental school is $30,000-$40,000 short of that number.
I would say you're not wrong. I would say at that rate, you're definitely well above average than what I'm seeing other dentists coming out of school with. And definitely you'd have some luxuries at that income. I'll say the minority of my friends, when we came out, it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago, they didn't make that out of school. Comfortable lifestyle, and their lifestyle quickly matched what they made as opposed to when they were students. So their expenses quickly came up, the new cars, new houses getting settled, things like that. So I would say you don't need that much to live comfortably, but definitely to have some, I would say 175, you'd have some luxuries at that rate. I don't know. What do you think? And that's exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, I think it's kind of hard to say because obviously it's an average and you hear about the people at the top of the average, but you don't hear about people at the bottom as much. People are not bragging about making $115,000 their first year out. But, I think that's a reality for a lot of people. But then I think it has to do with it has a lot to do with the associate position that you get. Maybe more so than the region of the country, I think. People talk about region, and region is important, but there are people who people who land in good spots everywhere. And I think Tim's group is a great example of a place that, is appealing to doctors because of the fact that they're able to maybe become high producers and earn a great income. And that's, and then somebody would say you can't make a lot of money in Florida. I don't know if people say that, but I think that there are opportunities for good associate positions everywhere. As doctors considering a new practice, especially a first practice, we tend to focus on a few key points, often at the expense of others. We worry about how we're going to pay for the construction, how to staff it, and how we're going to fill it with patients. With all these critical elements fighting for our attention, it's easy to forget that a practice is a system. It has a flow. Patients come in, are treated, and checked out. Rooms are stocked and restocked. Instruments are processed. Establishing how all these different activities will work together is critically important to the success of a startup. And it needs to happen early in the design process because fixing it later may not be an option. Understanding this whole practice approach is why we asked Design Ergonomics to join us as a sponsor. Design Ergonomics was founded by Dr. David Ahern, a practicing dentist, noted lecturer, and a frequent contributor to the ADA's Guide to Dental Office Design. For over 20 years, Design Ergonomics has been designing, equipping, and training some of the nation's most successful practices. One of the many things that sets Design Ergonomics apart is how they start the design process. Looking at a potential space, whether existing or new construction, they work with you to develop a conceptual outline of your practice. This initial drawing, called a blocking diagram, lays out all the elements of your final office in a way that is easy to visualize and can quickly be adjusted to suit your vision. Using screen sharing meetings, their design team will walk you through changes and explain key elements, impact a practice's productivity, and allow for future growth. blocking diagrams are low-cost tools that can determine how or if the space you're looking at will fit your goals. To learn more about blocking diagrams and other services Design Ergonomics offers, go to www.desergo.com. Enter promo code SHAREDBD, as in blocking diagrams, on the contact page to receive a $250 discount off of a blocking diagram for a limited time. Again, that's www.desergo.com.
Well, exactly, and of course, I think Jonas and I both know that Florida in itself is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different markets in terms of the opportunities themselves, and average levels of compensation and opportunities for growth, et cetera, et cetera. So Florida is a pretty large state. Well, isn't the population pushing 20 million? Is that right, Jonas?
I'm not following it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhere close. It's almost 20 million. It's a huge, it's the size of a good European country. So, but Florida in itself is 5, 6 different sub markets. And for example, comparing the North Florida market to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Southeast Florida market is they're completely different. So one is a working man's town, so to speak, with a lot of stability, and then on one hand, on the other hand, South Florida is a party central, but opportunities to make good money as an associate doctor are very few and far between. So
yeah.
But, let me ask you: Is your compensation? So how do you get an associate to produce that much to be compensated that much? Because the two are linked, unless you're just giving them a larger percentage of what they produce, right?
Well, you open up a can of worms there, didn't you?
I'm just asking. It's either they're producing more or they're being compensated more, like a higher percentage, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to make a lot of friends in the corporate dentistry this evening, I don't think. So I'm going to try to speak in generalities without calling out any names, but. Another thing is, and I'm sure you guys are very, very much aware of this, or maybe you're not. I've been in this business for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of changes in those 12 years. Because I came to the business of dentistry full time in 2006. So if you think about it, it was the latter part of that boom that we had. Everything was great. Unemployment was low. Housing values were going up and up and away, and then of course came 2007, 2008, 2009, and everything crashed. But associate doctor compensation did change a lot, and the big guys are definitely driving the bus. And the big guys are driving the bus because the guys that are financing them, telling them what to do. And if you are trying to increase your EBITDA, and as we all know, EBITDA is what drives everything basically in the business of dentistry these days. Nothing is going to increase your EBITDA quicker than cutting your associate doctor compensation. Nothing. You can try to out 1.2% out of your supplies. You can try to eke out 1.7% out of your lab bill. You can try to eke out 1.8% out of your support staff expense, but it is a lot easier to cut your associate doctor compensation by 8% percentage points, and all of a sudden your EBITDA looks a whole lot different. So again, I'm not going to call out any particular big groups, but there was the biggest group, and one of the biggest groups in the organization started the trend back in about 2010. I want to say 2010, 2011, when they instituted a big 5% percentage points drop in associate doctor compensation, and everybody was screaming bloody murder back then. And everybody was unhappy, and everybody was up in arms. And I was getting phone calls from the doctors, associate doctors that used to work for that, even doing this to us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's fast forward to 2018. And that compensation structure is actually one of the more generous ones today than than a lot of others offer. Last year, I sat down and analyzed the contract and the associate doctor compensation schedule for one of the faster growing East Coast DSOs. And after you cut everything out, after you cut all the legalese and all convoluted phrases and all hidden deductions, et cetera, it's 19%. Okay, it's 19% compensation, not 22, not 24, not 26, not 30 or 33 that it used to be back in the day. It's 19%. Okay, so 19% compensation versus 30% compensation is night and day. So, I am definitely, my percentage is definitely on the higher end of the national averages. I do believe that in our business model, in my world, doctors' ability to produce cannot be hampered by, us trying to discourage them to do so because they're not incentivized enough. So, and again, for me to be able to recruit more productive doctors on average, obviously, I need to be able to sell them on something, and the ability to be productive and to be profitable is a big part of it. So yes, our packages are more generous. Number one. Number two, big factor that not a lot of people talk about is what are you getting a percentage of? What I'm talking about is the actual average fee schedules. I mean, because it's sometimes I get engaged in these discussions where a doctor has been out of school for a while and he or she wants to get paid, let's say 33%, like it was back in 1996 or 2001. Okay, all right. So 33% of what? 33, because that's a very, very, very important question. And my assumption always is that doctors are very smart people and the all doctors should be good at math. Well, apparently that's not necessarily the case. So generally speaking, absolute majority of the practices in this country are driven by a few major procedures where the money is coming from. Usually it's crown or bridge, right? Or extractions or root canals. If you're a doctor that does a lot of root canals, okay, well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist and you don't have to take a lot of high-end applied math courses to very quickly realize that getting paid 33% of $620 is not nearly as good as getting paid 28%, for example. And I'm just throwing that number out there. 28% of $1,050. Okay, and that unfortunately gets lost on a number of folks. Average fee, because we sometimes I talk to a doctor who's trying to sell a practice or whatever, and we start talking about fees, and they say, oh well, my crown fee is $1,400. Okay, well that's great. What do you mean your crown fee is $1,400? Well, my UCR fee is $1,400. Well, that's nice, but do you take a lot of insurance in network? Yes, I do. Okay. Do you take some of the lower paying plans such as Aetna or United Concordia or MetLife? Yes, I do. Okay. Do you see a lot of patients with that sort of insurance? Yes, I do. Okay. So what is your actual average fee that you charged a patient last year for a crown? And a lot of folks don't know that those numbers, but typically speaking, even in the PPO intensive practice, I'm not even talking about HMO or Medicaid, but in a PPO intensive practice, an average fee typically these days is going to be somewhere between $600 and $700. In our organization, our average fee is $1,000. So that's a big difference. And that also pertains to, say extractions. If your average extraction, surgical extraction fee is $123, the difference between a a fee-for-service intensive practice such as ours, where an average fee is $220, that's going to add up very, very quickly. And the same goes for, endo. The same goes for even exams and Xrays, because most PPO insurance companies want to pay you $14, $12 for an X-ray, as opposed to your UCR that's 20, I don't know, 25, 26, 27, and you shoot thousands of X-rays every month. I mean, if you're not a very large office, maybe thousands of X-rays every year, and it all adds up. So,
totally
to make
with you, Tim.
Story short, to make long story short, our average fee is significantly higher than the majority of the larger players in the market, and our compensation structure is definitely more generous than the majority of my corporate competition. Matter of fact, I got to be totally honest with you, they've been making my job easier in terms of recruitment, because perhaps our number has come down, but it hasn't come down nearly as much as it has for all the bigger guys. Because as you know, there's there's a lot of talk about these coast-to-coast mergers and, big DSOs from out west moving. And those guys have been living in a, 22 to 24 to 26% compensation structure for years, for many years, for decades, actually. And they're bringing those numbers to Florida and Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama. And, and again, there's definitely a shift going on. And that does make my life easier in terms of, I have an easier sell, more productive talk.
So now, Tim,
to sum it up, so they don't produce more, you collect more. So that's what I think you're saying there. And that's
and when you say produce, we mean
numbers wise, same number of crowns as the next dentist, but you get a higher fee for the same amount of work. They get compensated higher for that work.
Exactly, and I to the listeners of this podcast, if you're buying a practice or you are considering an associateship in an established practice, always try to ask, okay, well, I'd like to see your UCR, but I also would like to see what is the average fee that you charge for your top 20 procedures for the last 6 months or for the last year. What is the average fee? Because that's a much more important number than what's on the UCR fee schedule.
And Tim, I want to switch gears a little bit, talking about the journey into multi-practice ownership. So I think
yes, sir.
For somebody with a practice, let's just say somebody listening to the podcast right now has one practice, and multi-practice ownership interests them. What are your thoughts on maybe the pace at which they decide to enter into it, how they do that, and I guess I'll start with timeline and strategy.
Yeah, I can talk about that specific topic because it's a very much of a multifaceted discussion. I can talk about that for the next 2 hours probably, but I'm going to try to be brief and more or less to the point. I think one of the most important questions that that kind of doctor needs to ask himself or herself is why and what are we after? Because multi-practice ownership is attractive, appealing, and sexy, but I think that a lot of doctors do it for let's say wrong reasons or reasons, if I may. Multi-practice ownership is a great idea if you are willing, you and your family, your spouse, are willing to commit to the process. If you are, going into it with your eyes open, understanding that for the next, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to be working 80 hours a week. There is never going to be a quiet weekend. And, very importantly, I got to be honest with you, in many, many cases, you need to be ready to take a pay cut. Okay. If you are willing to work extra hard, persevere, give it time, give it a lot of effort, and learn a bunch of new things that you don't know today. Perhaps it's the right thing to do. But I have a message for everyone. There is no easy money. There is no easy money in the business of dentistry. At least I haven't found it. There is no easy money in the business world. Period. Okay. I think that a productive doctor. Well, first of all, let me just say this. Just because you own an office, okay, right now, and you are productive and you are profitable, does not for 1 second mean that you are going to go open another office and be as productive and as profitable there. And quite frankly, I think it's an oxymoron. Another thing, another little factor and a little situation that I see time and time again is that, here is a super productive doctor that, runs an office, 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 10 chairs. And he or she produces, quite a bit of dentistry. And when I say quite a bit of dentistry, I mean, personal production, $120,000, $150,000, $180,000. And then they decide that they would like to hire associates and have locations that are run by associate doctors. And then all hell breaks loose and it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out once, twice, 3 times. The reason for that is running an associate doctor-driven organization is a completely different thing that has very little in common with you being a very productive solo owner-operator doctor. Okay, just because you have the skill, the God-given talent, the ability to do it yourself doesn't mean that your associate doctor that you're going to hire next month is going to be able to do the same. And the expectations very often, and I've seen it, with some of our friends and some of the people that we know in the industry and the community, the expectations are just not realistic. And very frequently that becomes an issue. I think that for anyone any doctor that wants to run offices that are basically staffed by associate doctors, it's a humbling experience, and you have to be ready for it. And if you, by nature, is not a very humble person, you probably are not going to be very successful at it, because it's all of a sudden it's not all about you. And if you are trying to make it about you, it's not going to work out either, because I know some doctors that have been in practice for 30, 35 years, and they've had associate doctors for 15, 20 years. And quite frankly, if they were totally honest and you asked them how many doctors have you had over these 15, 20 years, it would be a large number, say 20 plus. And how many of them were truly successful associateships? It's very low single digits. Why? Because the doctor is just not the right type of a doctor to successfully run associate doctor-driven practices. It's a completely different ball of wax. Another thing I'm going to say, which again, some people may disagree, I think that if you are going to look into multiple practice ownership, running 2 offices is very, very difficult. I think 3 offices is very difficult as well. I think you become legit once you have 4 offices and at least 3 out of 4 are, running very smoothly, and you're successful, you're profitable, you cash flow positive. Then you can say that, yes, I've cracked the code. I know what I'm doing. Everything is going to be good. Up until then, it's tough.
A quick word from our sponsor, Q Optics. In the last episode, I mentioned that I had upgraded my loops from 3.5 to 4.5 while I was still in dental school. And when I did that, my neck started hurting. And I was so frustrated because I loved that 4.5 magnification. First, I thought, oh, it's the angle of declination, or maybe it's the weight because it's a bulkier frame and heavier loops, and maybe that's what it is. I realized that the reason my neck hurt all the time was how much I had to bend down to look over my loops. And so if you look at yourself in the mirror, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stand in front of the mirror with your loops on and look at your eyes looking straight forward. If the loops, if the telescopes are blocking your eyeballs, that means anytime you look at something that's not through the loops, you have to crane your head down to look at it. You are hurting your neck. It blows my mind. Why can't you make a frame that's taller, that reaches down further? And if you look, you can see that Q Optics has designed their own frame that dips down to make room for the optics to go below your eye level. So I can put on my loops and I can actually look in the mirror and see clearly my eyeballs completely over the level of the telescopes. If you find that your neck's hurting or that your back is starting to hunch, maybe it's not necessarily the angle of declination or the weight. Maybe it's the fact that there isn't enough room in the lenses to see over your loops. So if you're ready to make the upgrade to better ergonomics, you can email sales@qoptics.com. That's q-optics.com with the promo code SP16 for $100 off your next pair of loops or $300 off your next loops and light combo. Q Optics. It's time to have a better look.
Another thing.
So Tim, real quick,
yes.
Getting to 4. I'm with you, and that's something I mentioned. I've talked about on the podcast occasionally. Is I feel like people get stuck in no man's land, and I think no man's land is like 2-3 offices. Where it's just a tough number because you have to do too much yourself. And so, how fast do you suggest getting to 4 to get out of that in between area?
Right. So that's again, I can talk about that specific question that you just asked me for another 45 minutes, but I'm going to, again, I'll try to give you a Reader's Digest and predicated on my personal experience. The answer is it depends. As my favorite accounting professor in college used to say, the answer is always it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on your financial ability to carry debt. It depends on what type of a practice you're running. Because again, I run a very demanding type of a business model. Okay, for us, growing very, very fast is going to be suicidal. Okay, that's on one hand. On the other hand, if you're running much easier to manage and operate a business model that is highly dependent on Medicaid, that is highly dependent on HMO. And again, from what I understand from talking to people in other parts of the country, I mean, Texas is case in point. Medicaid expansion has been amazing for the state of Texas. And, you see all of these DSOs that are growing at ridiculous speeds popping up, and really they've been popping up for about 4 or 5 years now, and going from 5 offices to 50 offices in a matter of 3 years, literally. That's a different story because again, those are much easier to manage, much easier to administer type of business models, and you can afford to do that. Again, with me, we are growing very, very slowly. It was at a very slow pace, just because we believe that we need to be very judicious in our assessments of the situations, and we also have very high demands for maintaining profitability, and our standards for cash flow positive operations are very high as well. I recently had a conversation with a representative from a definitely a top 5 national DSOs that has a presence in 16, 17 states, and we were talking about de novos because that guy works for a company that, like a lot of them do, they do these de novos that are huge. They have 12, 15, 18 operatories. They pump in $1 million, $1.2 million into them. And these are brand new offices. And I asked them, hey, I mean, what is your target? And what are you guys are willing to put up with in terms of being cash flow positive? He told me that, hey, listen, some offices are not going to be cash flow positive for 5 years. As long as they're growing, that's all that the owners really care about. To me, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't be able to do that. 5 years, not being cash flow positive, I just don't understand how that works. I think that kind of attitude and that kind of statements really make me wonder as to what the future of the business is and when is the bubble gonna burst, and what is gonna be the aftermath of the bubble bursting. But again, that's a different story. So we are pretty risk averse. Obviously, that's why we're growing so slowly. We are pretty debt sensitive and very debt averse, because truth of the matter is the American model is, it takes money to make money. And I totally agree that there is good debt and bad debt, but again, our willingness to take on a lot of debt is pretty low. And I wouldn't call it non-existent, but it's pretty low. And and that's why we are doing it very, very conservatively. But it seems to be working out for us. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our first practice was started in 2005, and to us it was a lot of money back then. I think our first practice, it was a de novo, was a nice build out. I think we spent about $380,000-$400,000. And when the market crashed, when the economy tanked, it was tough. And it's kind of all these stories about people who have survived Great Depression, and they all very, very conservative for the rest of their lives. I guess that's a similar type of effect that it had on us. So,
Tim, if you had to give some advice, to the young dentists out there, well, the more established dentists now that have one practice and they're thinking about going to two, and this is in their heart of hearts, this is what they want.
Yep.
How would you see that transition made? I know there are a lot of pros to it, I know there are a lot of cons. How would you see that dentist going from one to two?
Yeah, 1 to 2 is it can be difficult and can be very difficult, or it cannot. So the biggest question is, when you go from 1 to 2, who's going to do dentistry in that second office? Is it going to be you, Dr. So-and-so, who already has a practice, and you are assuming you are successful? One thing for sure, as a side note, in my humble opinion, if you are not very successful in your first location, and if you are having severe problems, and your profitability is tanking, your production is tanking, and you've been in that location for a while, I don't think you should be looking at a second office at that point. I don't think it's the right time to be.
Do you think is there a litmus test that you would think that could validate a dentist ready to take the step to two practices that you can think of? Like maybe having like one associate, or being able to run our office consecutive amount of days without even walking in it, things like that.
Well, I would, let's talk about specifics. Okay. So let's just say that I'm a doctor and I run an office. I've been in this office for, 5 years, and the office is producing at least $140,000, $150,000 a month, of which, hopefully $35,000-$40,000 comes from hygiene. I do the rest. My profit margin is 42%. Okay, 45%. Yeah, I think that's a good time. You can make an argument that everything else being equal, an associate doctor is going to be doing that work, so 30% is going to be paid to the associate doctor. You're still going to be very much cash flow positive, very much profitable. However, if you are a single owner-operator doctor in a solo practice, and your practice, it's you and one hygienist, and you only generate $60,000-$70,000 a month, and your take home is, let's say, $15,000, and you think that you're ready for your location number 2, I don't think you're being very realistic. So I don't think that's the right time. Again, you have to have a track record of success in pretty decent profitability, in my opinion. Again, but going back to the previous question, the big question is, are you going to be the one practicing in that second location part-time, mostly or not at all, because that's gonna have a major effect. Because if you're buying an existing practice and it's not a very high sale price, you can make an argument that you're going to go into that second location and work there 2 days a week, and you're a super productive doctor. And as long as you have 2 days, 2 really busy, really productive days a week, all of a sudden, it's going to be enough to carry the practice. But if you're not planning to work at all in that location number 2, that's a completely different story, completely different ball of wax, completely different expense summary, and completely different set of expectations. So that's one of the key questions for any doctor that need to be answered as far as what location number 2, are we going to do it? Are we not going to do it? And if we are going to do it, what is it going to look like? Who's going to work there? Because in the end of the day, if there's no dentistry being produced, it's very hard to justify any kind of investment, even if it may seem low at the first glance.
And Tim, if you don't mind me asking, you talked earlier about humility being a skill that, or a characteristic of a successful multi-practice owner. So what other personal characteristics or, skills that they should have business-wise that would make somebody successful running multiple practices?
You got to be patient. You got to be a good people manager. Dentistry, like many other businesses, are very people intensive, meaning that your staff is very important. You got to be able to hire the right people. You have to be able to manage your people. You must have the ability to lead them. And as you guys, I'm sure both know, just because you're a very good dentist does not mean a good clinician, does not mean at all that you would be a good manager. What makes a 2-office or even a 3-office type of an organization difficult is the fact that if you are not a good people manager, if you're not a good leader, when you only have 2 or 3 locations, you probably cannot afford high quality management staff. So then you're basically forced to do a lot of it yourself, and that, again, that becomes very, very time consuming, and that can be hard on you, can be hard on your family, can be hard on your spouse, et cetera, et cetera. That's why as you grow, it becomes easier, assuming that you are profitable, assuming that you're successful, assuming you're cash flow positive, it becomes easier to attract or retain good management staff that can actually do a lot of the work that used to be done by you, the owner, the doctor. So that's humility is huge, and just the ability to manage people and provide leadership, because that's supremely important. Obviously, you have to understand your numbers. I mean, you don't have to be you don't necessarily need a CPA or an MBA from a top 20 school, but some understanding, some business experience is highly recommended.
Tim, can we talk about the 2 scenarios you brought up in the past? The 2 scenarios where one is the doctor trying to work both practices, and the other is a doctor opening up an associate-driven practice. Obviously they both have their challenges. What do you think is the easier path, or what do you think is the biggest challenge there?
Opening up a second location where you, the owner, are working at least a couple of days a week is obviously a lot easier, because you're still relying on your proven ability. I assume it's a proven ability to deliver the results. It's obviously a lot more predictable. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I would not recommend anyone who has never hired, employed, and been successful with an associate doctor going in cold turkey, opening a second location or taking over an existing office and just hiring your first associate at that point. I think it makes a lot more sense to bringing in an associate doctor as your first trial balloon, so to speak, into an existing office, your first office, so you can make those first mistakes. You can gain the necessary experience to be able to get through phase one in that process. So when you do take over that office, or you do start a de novo office, you know what it's like to work with an associate doctor. It's not a brand new experience to you, but again, what's easier definitely would be much easier to be able to be in a situation where you are opening a second office, or you're taking over an existing office, and you're going in there a couple of times, couple of days a week, and say productive doctor these days will produce what, $7,000-8,000 a day. 7 times 2 times 4.2. All of a sudden, you're at $50,000 already in a month, and hopefully you at least broken even. So yeah, that's definitely
very true.
I really appreciate you coming on, Tim. Jonas, did you have anything else for Tim?
No, I thought it was awesome. I always like listening to Tim. I honestly could listen to him talk forever. Big fan. I just think you're very knowledgeable, and you come from a place of experience. So, and you can throw out examples for each scenario. So it's awesome to hear.
And I think one thing I really enjoyed about the interview, Tim, is the honesty. I think a lot of times it's a subject that people glorify and don't talk about in detail, and paint a real picture of what it's like. And so I appreciate you coming on and, being honest with us about what it's like, and, offered some great information for our listeners. So I really appreciate you coming on, Tim.
Absolutely. Anytime, guys, and good luck with everything. And thanks for the invite.
I hope you guys really enjoyed that episode. I think every time Tim comes on, he just really brings everything in authenticity that I don't think is matched or maybe very common in the industry. So I really appreciated him coming on and sharing his unique experience and what he's been able to do with his wife. So I think that was really valuable for both Jonas and I. I think we talked about it off air quite a bit on how much we really enjoyed that interview with Tim. So thanks again coming on the show. 2 episodes with him in a pretty short time, and I think that was really cool having us both in the interview. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I think one thing that stuck out to me was simply the fact of collections for associates, or the percentage that they're making going down over time. I think from my perspective, I've always thought about the fact that you want your associates to be high producing, but Tim brings up a great point that, reducing the amount that you're paying associates is probably the fastest way to reduce overhead for big groups that employ associate dentists all over the country. So I thought that was an interesting point, and I think it makes sense now that I'm thinking about it, but it's not something that struck me as the reality before I listened to the interview. So I thought that was very interesting. I think there was a lot of great pearls in here. And I think I don't want to call it a reality check, but a great realistic view of what multi-practice ownership is. I think it's, like Tim was saying, kind of the sexy thing in dentistry lately. And I always like to have somebody on who's going to tell you what it is and what it's like, and give you a realistic view, so that if that's something you're thinking about, you can make a more educated decision one way or the other. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Shared Practices Podcast.